We have news, of course, that the Vatican would respond to the leaked information about the reasoning behind Traditionis Custodes. They'd have to respond because at some point a Vatican spokesperson was going to get in front of the media to report things the Holy Father did and would then take questions from the said media. And they did exactly that. And we'll get all to that here in a moment, but I'm going to show you first some appointments. I'm dovetailing here on yesterday's Divergence, where I decided to talk about AI videos. There's a report going on from YouTube channels that are purely AI. Somebody is making videos aimed at Catholics using an AI voiceover, AI imagery, and spreading fake news, misinformation. They're literally making things up. And I reported on that yesterday. If you didn't see it, just go watch the beginning of my video yesterday. And let me know if you would like me to do a live stream where I show you the channels specifically. I can't play you their videos because if I do, they will do what people always do, which is they will use copyright claims to destroy my channel. Literally, I've seen it happen before. And I was reminded of that from a viewer yesterday. So, but if you want me to show you these channels, which ones are the fake AI channels, I can do so in a live stream if you want. Let's talk about appointments, because Cardinal Burke has not been appointed to anything by Pope Leo, despite what the fake news AI channels are saying. Instead, we got this yesterday. Appointment of members of the Dicastery for Interreligious Dialogue. This is from the Vatican's own website. The Holy Father has appointed the following as members of the Dicastery for Interreligious Dialogue. Their eminences: Cardinal Pier Battista Pizzaballa, the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem; Tarcisio Sio Cucucci, Archbishop of Tokyo; Dominic Joseph Matteo, Archbishop of Tehran; and Frank Leo, Archbishop of Toronto, Canada; Archbishop Bernard Longley of Birmingham; Archbishop Mitchell Thomas Rosansky of St. Louis; Archbishop Yogok Marad of Homs of the Syrians; Archbishop Vera Arpadurantka of Bangkok, Thailand, and it goes on and on and on and on. Though, of course, for most of you, the most interesting name will be Cardinal Pier Battista Pizzaballa. He has been appointed as a member of the Dicastery for Interreligious Dialogue, and if he's also appointed Father Russell McDougall from the United States as the Secretary for Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs, and those are kind of be the more interesting ones for our purposes here, because people tend to like Cardinal Battista or Pier Battista Pizzaballa, and the reason they like him is he has, all the outward traditional trappings. He sounds like a pope when he speaks. He sounds Catholic, and he has defended the faith in some really brutal circumstances, which is why he was a natural fit for that post. Now, let's go on to the main story. As I predicted yesterday on this channel, there was a press conference about Pope Leo's new votive mass for Care for Our Common Home, and that press conference got a little spicy. I predicted that yesterday, not to pat myself on the back, but it was obvious that this was going to happen. And if we have time, I'll talk about the new votive mass setting for Laudato Si nonsense towards the end of this broadcast. But in that press conference, someone asked Matteo Brun, a Vatican spokesperson, about the Dion Montagna leaked document about Traditionis Custodes. And I'm going to just show you the clip of his response, because thankfully somebody decided that they would translate over it with an overdub, and it's accurate. So here we go.
So let me take the floor. Well, it doesn't seem to be relevant with today's press conference. We are talking about Missa pro custodia creationis. So these are two different issues, but by way of information, I'm not confirming the genuineness of the texts that have been published. This is part of one of the documents on which the decision was based, and this, of course, is very, very incomplete and partial reconstruction. Now, the consultation that's just been mentioned was then supported by other documentation, other reserved reports, and further consultations that the Dicastery for the Doctrine of Faith has received. But I won't add anything else, because this has nothing to do with today's press conference.
So he dodged the question. Nicely done. You just dodge the question. A Catholic news agency reported on this exchange. We already know what Traditionis Custodes is. We know what the controversy is. If you don't, Don Montagna, a journalist who is well known for being at those press conferences in Rome, famously during the Synod on Synodality, asked the hardest questions of anybody asking questions of the cardinals in that room. And she's gotten a lot of good sources, done a lot of great reporting. I think she's got a lot of credibility. Not everybody agrees with that, though. But she's the one who got leaked a document that was the official assessment of the survey asked of the bishops during Traditionis Custodes. And this is what the controversy here is. Francis always said that the bishop's response to a survey influenced his decision to ban the traditional Latin Mass. Now, this has been widely read as the bishops having asked him to ban the traditional Mass, that at least a plurality of them, a mere tiny majority would have. And to be fair, many of Francis's own auxiliaries made it sound exactly like that. That was what was said in the survey results. They said this over the years. Cardinal Roche said this, others had said it themselves. Don Montagna showed that that wasn't actually the case. There was no majority of bishops, according to an official Vatican document, who asked for this. However, it's worth noting, Francis never quite said it that way. The Catholic News Agency article makes it sound like the survey results influenced his decision. And we know that a sizable minority of bishops were very, very vocal about their hatred of the traditional Mass and wanted it banned. And we know this as a perfect example, the French bishops. For whatever reason, France is probably per capita the capital of the traditionalist movement. More traditional Catholic Mass options had been there, more traditional Catholics were there, more vocations there per capita. As a portion of their population, it was a heavier presence. And their bishops didn't want anything to do with this. They could not believe what was happening. And there were a whole lot of stories that spun off from this that I covered over the years here. We'll go to the Catholic News Agency article here because, well, you'll see this is the most accurate headline that they could possibly have published. Vatican downplays leaked documents on Latin Mass. That's putting it mildly. I just gave you most of the background on Traditionis Custodes. Let's go to this portion here. Quote, Francis's decree revoked the permissions granted by Pope Benedict XVI in his 2007 decree Summorum Pontificum. The claim that a majority of bishops around the world wanted restrictions on the ancient Mass, the traditional Latin Mass, was always dubious, but this document shows for all to see that it is completely false, says Joseph Shaw, president of the Latin Mass Federation Una Voce International, where he said this in a newsletter on July 2nd. Shaw said the leaked documents show only the views of the minority of bishops who really disliked the traditional Mass were being acted upon. The majority view was ignored. And this is probably the most accurate take I've seen on this. Traditionis Custodes placed significant restrictions on the celebration of the Mass according to the missals from before the liturgical reforms of the Second Vatican Council. In the decree, Pope Francis said he had taken into consideration, quote, the wishes expressed by the episcopate and the opinion of the congregation for the doctrine of the faith. He explained in a letter accompanying the decree that in 2020, he had asked the now dicastery for the doctrine of the faith to carry out a survey of the bishops around the world about the results of the implementation of the 2007 norms on the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass. Quoting that letter directly, the responses reveal a situation that preoccupies and saddens me and persuades me of the need to intervene, Francis wrote in the letter. He added that the intention of his predecessors to foster unity among Catholics with diverse liturgical sensibilities, quote, has often been seriously disregarded, and the opportunity, quote, exploited to widen the gaps, reinforce the divergences, and encourage disagreements that injure the Church, block her path, and expose her to the peril of division. According to one of the leaked documents, a 5-page, quote, overall assessment that, according to Montagna, was part of a never-published report, more than 200 pages long, on the results of the 2020 questionnaire, the consultation found, quote, the majority of bishops who responded and who have generously and intelligently implemented the motu proprio ultimately expressed satisfaction with it. But some bishops state that Summorum Pontificum has failed in its aim of fostering reconciliation and therefore requested suppression. The leaked assessment said some bishops stated they would prefer to return to the pre-2007 rules for the traditional Latin Mass, when its celebration required permission from the local bishop in order to have greater control management of the situation. End quote. And that's sort of the very moderate take on it. But note what Francis said there. He said it influenced his decision. Some of the responses influenced his decision. And it's clear that the responses he listened to were those of like the French bishops, some of the American bishops. You can guess who those cardinals and bishops were, and all the rest. Either way, the response, though, from Matteo Brun on behalf of the Vatican and the Pope was tone deaf, to put it mildly. Deacon Nick Donnelly took to X. You're probably familiar with his work if you're on social media at all. I quote him from time to time. He is a permanent deacon in the church. He said this, quote, Matteo Brun, the Vatican spokesman, thinks that the revelation that Traditionis Custodes was predicated on a deliberate lie is a laughing matter, something that has caused immense harm to the church, destroying parish communities, breaking the hearts of countless faithful Catholics, causing unnecessary strife and division in the worldwide church. This is how seriously some in the Vatican take breaking the 8th commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness. And that's a screenshot of Matteo Brun dismissing the leaked document exposing the big lie. And yes, as you saw in the clip, he was just chuckling it off. Tone deaf, extremely tone deaf. If you're wanting to restore trust between conservative and traditionally minded Catholics and traditionalists with the Vatican, couldn't open the wallets up. Got a topic on that I've been holding up on live streams for a few days because of this topic. If you want to fix this problem, maybe don't have people laughing off the concerns of those who've been most wounded in the church in recent years. Just a thought. Now, not to be outdone, we have this from Edward Penton. He is a journalist for the National Catholic Register, meaning the print arm of EWTN. He had this thought on that press conference. Although Vatican spokesman Matteo Brun would not confirm the authenticity of the leaked CDF documents on the survey of bishops that led to restrictions on the Mass, he told reporters today they contribute to only a, quote, very partial and incomplete reconstruction, quote, of the decision-making process, and that additional documentation was consulted. The Register has asked Holy See Press Office if, given the gravity of the matter, if it will be releasing all the documentation that led to Traditionis Custodes. And he's got a full English translation here. He says, I'll take the floor because I don't believe this is a question. I mean, you heard what he had to say, right? But they're not going to release the full text. That's just not going to happen. You know this. I know this. They're not going to release the full documents. My suspicion is the Holy See wants this to go away. They just want this whole topic to go away. And I don't think that that's actually possible. Now, here is Dr. Peter Quaznooki. I'll give you another media response here in a moment, but here's Dr. Peter Quaznooki quoting Ed Feser. Let's go with Ed Feser first because Dr. Quaznooki has his own thoughts he adds onto this. Now, Ed Feser is a Thomistic philosopher, Catholic professor. Here's what he has to say. The very idea that it was attendance at the Latin Mass that somehow led traditionalists to criticize Pope Francis was always laughable. What led them to criticize him were his many doctrinally problematic statements, his questionable episcopal and personnel appointments, his deal with the Chinese government, his foot dragging in dealing with the alleged evil man who inflicted evil things on nuns like Rupnik, and so on. This is also why many conservatives who had little interest in the Latin Mass and who had resisted traditionalist criticisms of John Paul II and Benedict XVI, and now today resist some of the criticisms of Leo XIV, to be completely transparent about it, they became critical of Francis. The truth is that Francis was, especially on doctrinal matters, simply dramatically unlike his predecessors, and a pretense to the contrary is shameless gaslighting on the part of progressives and pure cope, as the kids say, on the part of everyone else. He's not wrong. Nothing he says there is incorrect. Dr. Quaznooki adds to this. He says, I generally agree with Feser, but would make one refinement to his point here. Francis's predecessors did sadly move in a direction that made his own views possible, even if he went much further and crossed several red lines. In some ways, he was different in kind, but in other ways, merely different in degree. This will all get sorted out sooner or later. I think a key point is that Montini, Wojtyla, and Ratzinger, Paul VI, John Paul II, and Benedict XVI, all had traditional leanings and sentiments that acted as counterweights to their progressive tendencies, while Bergoglio had none. Well, okay, there was some populist Marian devotion, but that's about it. What you got with the other popes was spirit and letter of Vatican II and other stuff. What you got with Francis was spirit of Vatican II, period. And remember, part of this is because this was necessary, we were told, because people criticized Pope Francis, whose feelings were hurt, I guess. Which is, by the way, the greatest disservice you could do to somebody. in defending this unpopular decision they make was to basically say, well, yeah, they did it because you hurt their feelings or some other stupid reason like that. Now, America Magazine did report on this, and they have a more kind of a measured approach to their report. I was a little surprised. But again, America Magazine will often promote really terrible things, but they'll do it in a measured way. So their headline is Latin Mass debate grows after apparent lack of Vatican liturgy report. After apparent leak of Vatican liturgy report, rather. Well, you're going to skip. They give you a lot of context here. This is the important part. Quote, the documents, the leaked documents, contain some negative and neutral opinions and say some bishops considered Benedict's reform inappropriate and disturbing, dangerous and worthy of suppression. But the Vatican's own assessment said the majority of bishops who responded expressed satisfaction. It cited the rise in religious vocations in traditionalist communities and said young Catholics in particular were drawn to the sacredness, seriousness, and solemnity of the liturgy. It's not clear what other evidence, anecdotes, or documentation informed Francis's decision to reverse Benedict, but from the very start, Francis was frequently critical of traditionalist Catholics, whom he accused of being navel-gazing retrogrades out of touch with the evangelizing mission of the Church in the 21st century. The new documents have comforted traditionalists who felt attacked and abandoned by Francis. The new revelations confirm that Pope Francis restricted the traditional Mass at the request of only a minority of bishops and against the advice of the dicastery in charge of the subject, said Joseph Shaw of the Latin Mass Society of England and Wales. The majority view of the bishops that restricting the TLM would cause more harm than good has sadly been proven correct. In an email, he said Leo should address the issue urgently. I am not convinced he will. Because any way you cut it, traditionalists and anybody who maybe isn't a traditionalist but would like to see the traditional Mass restored, even if they may never go to one, we tend to represent a minority position. Most of the people don't care. That's the simple fact. So I'm not convinced that he will necessarily respond, but maybe he will. I would like to be wrong. And I'd like to be wrong that I don't think a response would be necessarily positive either. I would like the Pope to respond in a positive way, to be clear. Now, in response to all this, Catholic Set on X dug up something interesting. They posted a clip from right after Traditionis Custodes was issued. It's an example of the navel-gazing retrogrades who were allegedly disrespectful to Francis in their response to Traditionis Custodes. Most people didn't take to the internet and get super angry. You saw a lot of that because loud, angry voices tend to be the loudest. Here's Catholic Set. Remember when young people from Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Italy, France, Estonia, the US, Nigeria, Indonesia, Croatia, Ireland, Sri Lanka made a direct plea to Pope Francis for the traditional Mass a week after Traditionis Custodes was published? Let's see if we can figure out what the problem here is.
Dear Pope Francis, dear bishops.
As young Catholics who go to the traditional Latin Mass, we often encounter a lack of understanding in the older generations.
We do not question the validity of the new liturgy or disdain its celebration.
We love the traditional Mass, not because we are old and grumpy.
We love it not because we are old-fashioned.
We love it not because we are separatists.
We love the traditional Latin Mass for its devotion and trustful fear of God.
We love its orientation of priest and faithful together in the same direction, towards God and Christ.
We love it because it is the same all over the world. It is universal, Catholic in the original sense of the word.
We love it because its transcendence gives us peace and hope the world cannot give.
We do not widen the gaps or reinforce the divergences.
We do not encourage disagreements that injure the Church.
We do not block her path or expose her to the peril of division.
We simply aim at Christian life in faith, hope, and love for God and neighbor.
We try to follow the call to holiness, and we draw our strength from the Latin Mass.
Dear Holy Father, dear bishops, we are not just a few deplorably stubborn adherents of an outdated rite.
As loyal Roman Catholics, we are your multitudinous and lively youth.
We are your sheep.
We are your faithful.
We pray for you every day.
Please do not let us down.
Can we count on you?
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 How rigid. How disrespectful. Yeah, I can't imagine anybody being bothered by that. I want to show you something else that happened on the topic of resisting the suppression of all reverence in the Mass. Bishop Martin of Charlotte is in the news again for having been embarrassed in front of his brother bishops. He'd had kneelers removed from a parish where he and other bishops would be offering the Mass. And well, several Catholics knelt anyway when receiving communion on the hard floor to receive our Lord the way we should receive him. And he is now paying, I think, the price ultimately for what he did, which is be kind of just embarrassed about all the things. So let me show you this here. And what you're seeing is, people receiving as they should and people just kneeling. In fact, it's not just a few. It's people over and over again. And some might say, well, they're making a show of it. You can make that critique if you want. And maybe that's true if it's only one person or something. But it's not just one person. I mean, so far, this is like everybody who's going up to receive. Even the woman who needed help getting down and getting back up because of her age knelt to receive. And it just goes on and on like this. I would submit to you that is not what he thought was going to happen at that Mass. Remove the kneelers or remove the problem. Before we pivot to the other topic, David Keller with a super chat. Thank you, sir. A good tree cannot yield bad fruit, right judgment. Generally a good rule to follow, especially when thinking about the responses to these things coming from Rome. Ryan Gabriel says those 7-year-olds stuck in their ways. Helen Grace, yes, rigid children, of course. It's hard to denigrate this. Now, some people would say, well, you're just using your children to make a political point, yada, yada, yada. And to be fair, we make that claim too when we see in the secular world people trotting their kids out to promote evil ideas in the world. And I tend to even disagree with it when I see conservatives in the secular world dragging their kids out to make some political point. I do. But I think this is different. You're teaching your kids proper reverence in the Mass. And they're willing to do it. They have the courage to do it, even when probably they know to some degree that it's going to be viewed a little askance by their bishop. Now, speaking of reverence in things, we had an update. At that same press conference where all those questions were asked that were very unpleasant about the ban of the traditional Mass. The purpose of that press conference was the new votive Mass for Care for Our Common Home. I hinted at this earlier in the week that this was going to come, and they had their press conference about it. I read the text. On the surface level, it could have been way worse. It really, really could have been. The text of the votive Mass could have been far worse. In light of things we've all gone through in the last several years, it wasn't actually all that bad. But the response to this from Catholics, from just normal lay Catholics that I saw all over social media, including from very mild-mannered people, was just they'd had enough and they weren't going to do this anymore. Because it is an endorsement, a tacit endorsement of the big lie that human beings are a scourge on creation, on our common home. And that we're destroying everything with our wicked, wicked, wicked smoke and things coming out of our factories and things. And we're being bad and all the rest of it. It's propaganda we're all very familiar with. If you're familiar with Laudato Si, Laudate Deum, the follow-up that Francis did, if you're familiar with the fact that not just Francis, but Benedict and John Paul II also talked about this stuff quite a lot, not to the level that Francis did, people are tired of it. And they're honestly tired of it from the secular world. And this is why people responded the way they did to the announcement of the new votive Mass, which the Pope will be saying at Castel Gandolfo during his vacation, which reportedly is going to have some sort of like secular summit happening there, which is kind of a red flag, honestly. We'll wait and see on what happens with that. Let's take a look here on the reporting. We go to, we'll call it a very friendly to the subject news site, the German bishop's official news website, katholisch.de. With this headline, Vatican introduces new Mass for the preservation of creation. And calling it a new Mass is going to be something people will be confused by. This is not a replacement for the Novus Ordo liturgy. It's not a spin-off like the Amazonian Rite or the Zaire use or the Mayan Rite, which is the most troubling of all of them. It's not like that. This is a votive Mass, and votive Masses are for very specific intentions, and this one's intention is for the preservation of creation. Here are the details from katholisch.de. Catholics worldwide can now celebrate a Mass with the focus on protecting the environment. By decree, the Vatican has concluded the Mass for the care of creation. In the official missal, with this Mass, the Church offers liturgical, spiritual, and communal support for the care we all must take for nature, our common home, said Cardinal Michael Shawnee, prefect for the Dicastery of Promoting Integral Human Development, at the presentation on Thursday in the Vatican. Now, as an aside, I don't know why this dicastery exists. This is their Sustainable Development Dicastery. You may as well have a dicastery for economic development, or a dicastery for mutually fair trade relations. I mean, that's the same kind of thing. It's a very secular dicastery, and many of us don't know why it exists. It calls us to be faithful stewards of what God has entrusted to us in our daily decision and politics. Interesting word there, politics, as well as in prayer, worship, and the way we live in the world. Shawnee continued. Pope Leo XIV is scheduled to celebrate the new Mass for the first time next week in Castel Gandolfo. The introduction of the new Mass coincides almost exactly with the 10th anniversary of the publication of Laudato Si. In this encyclical, Pope Francis called for more intensive efforts to protect the environment and promote social justice. The current decree, signed on June 8th, quotes from the letter. In our time, it is evident that the work of creation is seriously threatened by the irresponsible use and misuse of the goods God has entrusted to us. For this reason, it seems appropriate to add the form for the care of creation to the Missal. It contains various Bible texts related to the theme. At the beginning of the Mass, it says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament proclaim the work of his hands." The prayer of thanksgiving after receiving communion is, "May the sacrament of unity we have received, Father, strengthen communion with you and among us, so that as we await the new heavens and the new earth, we may learn to live in harmony with all creatures, through Christ our Lord." And this is a phrase that I've seen a lot of people zoom in on as being troubling. We may learn to live in harmony with all creatures. And that's an interesting phrasing. What does that mean? What does it mean to live in harmony with all creatures? We know the biblical standard. If you read Genesis, after the fall, man is given dominion over the earth, over the beasts of the land, and he's going to till the earth with the sweat of his brow, suffer because of the fall, and doing all those things. But is having dominion over the earth the same as being in harmony with it? Now, I don't think it is. I think there's a lot of secular kind of ideas there. It's one of the things that most of the post-conciliar popes have jumped onto to some degree or another. I have a book on my bookshelf called The Green Pope. It's got Benedict XVI on the cover, and it's just excerpts from his various speeches that he had given and writings over his pontificate that got him labeled the Green Pope. They said similar things about John Paul II before him. So Francis was just building on, as Peter Quaznooki recently said, on a similar subject, the work of his predecessors. He just went way further with it than anybody else. And so it's just a continuation of the same theme that we've seen in the church now for, 30 years at least? This Mass will be said at Castel Gandolfo. I don't know if your parish is ever going to have this Mass said if you watch this as someone who goes to an ordinary form parish. It could very well happen. If it did, I would expect it on Earth Day next year, or some other observation like it maybe later this year. Margaret says, "I'm concerned it starts as a votive Mass, but with a later agenda coming. Can't creation, nature be understood and prayed for taken from the scriptures?" You'd think so. You would think that that any actual Catholic response to these things would be based in the scriptures and the sacred tradition about man toiling the earth and all the right problems we see in nature are just a consequence of the fall and all those things. In fact, that would be a great way to address the issue. But that hasn't been the Vatican style in 30 years or more. Really, probably. I think even Paul VI said some things about like water pollution and things. So really going back like almost 60 years on this subject. Smoggy Froggy says, very telling they're pushing this new mass, but are doing everything they can to shut down the TLM. Yeah, and as I reported earlier, they're not responding, it seems, in any meaningful way to the TLM leaks. I suspect they're just going to try to let the story go away, and it will eventually, except for people like us who tend to have a long memory about these things. Jonah says, the majority of people understand the Latin language. They use Latin. But if they use Latin language in the Philippines, how majority of people can understand the words they speak? The Latin language was never a barrier to converting souls. It never was. Archbishop Lefebvre, founder of the SSPX, before he got into all that trouble, was the head of an organization called the Holy Ghost Fathers. They were a missionary group to Africa, and they said the traditional mass and won souls to Christ in large numbers, to the point where people still talk about him today with fond memory there. It will eventually be, if there's ever a cause for canonization for him, once the current situation in the church is wrapped up, that will be some of the evidence they use in support of him, that he had a natural following. The Latin language was never a barrier. The traditional mass was said to the Native Americans by Jesuit missionaries. It was said to the indigenous population of Central and South America in Latin. These were never barriers. It's a modern fiction to say that this was a problem. The Philippines, you cite the Philippines. The Philippines was made Catholic long before Vatican II with the traditional Latin Mass. Now, I'm curious, though. Okay, Casey says, when will we see a votive Mass for the protection of those who have yet to be born? You're never going to see that. It's too hot button of an issue. The church today is in the business of trying to be friendly to the world. It's been like that since 1962, when John the 23rd said it was time to open the windows of the church to the world to let some fresh air in. And you started seeing the papal tiara being essentially taken off by the popes and never picked up again, and choosing accompaniment instead of pointing out sin, for the most part. Occasionally you'd see a public figure condemned or something, or church officials would say something in defense of the truth on the public stage, but rarely. Neo Thomas says, I think we should not expect to see any addressing of Traditionis Custodes, perhaps a non-official laxing to an eventual non-enforcement, perhaps. It would be good to see bishops test the waters on that. I would love to see one of the bishops who's friendlier to tradition just authorize another parish in his diocese, a diocesan parish, not just the one that they're allowed or whatever the number is from Traditionis Custodes, but start allowing others where people want it, and then wait for Rome to respond. Because you'll get the people who are troublemakers in the diocese who will contact Rome. Ooh, the bishop is violating Traditionis Custodes. They'll write to Rome, and then we'll see what happens. That's the best way to handle this, is to respectfully and quietly force the issue. Now, I'm curious what you have to say about all this, so let me know in the comments, please. Are you surprised at all about that votive mass? What are your thoughts on the votive mass? Do you see how that votive mass is kind of weird news to happen at the same time that the whole TLM suppression was happening and all the news related to that? Let me know what you think about this in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Sharing this on social media helps too. Have a good holiday weekend, ladies and gentlemen. If you're in the United States, it's the kind of time where people like to have a few extra, adult beverages. So please be a little careful out there. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.